I've got some troubling news about England's royal family.
Princess Anne entered the private royal briefing, expecting a closed discussion involving only senior members of the monarchy. Instead, she stopped in the doorway. Several members of Queen Camilla's family were already seated inside a meeting intended to deal with sensitive royal matters. Anne did not sit down. She did not pretend nothing was wrong. In this dramatized royal scenario, she halted the briefing immediately, and the silence that followed changed the atmosphere inside the palace. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Anne stayed beside her chair, her anger controlled but unmistakable. The private royal briefing, a closed meeting used for sensitive family, household, and institutional matters, had been arranged for her. Charles, William, Camilla, and only a small circle of senior advisors. That restriction mattered because the discussion touched issues that could affect trust inside the household and decisions made at the highest level. Yet Camilla's relatives were already seated as if their presence had been expected. Camilla felt the challenge immediately. She watched Anne refuse to sit, knowing the Princess Royal was not treating this as a social misunderstanding. Charles felt the tension tighten around him. He wanted to protect his wife from humiliation, but he also knew that defending her too quickly could make the arrangement look deliberate. William said nothing. The prince simply closed his folder and looked toward his father, a quiet gesture that made clear Anne was not alone in questioning what had happened. Then, Anne noticed the details. Reserved seats had been placed directly in front of Camilla's family, and briefing folders had been prepared near them. Nothing about it looked spontaneous. Someone had planned for those seats to be occupied. Someone had made space inside a meeting that was supposed to remain restricted. Anne's expression hardened, and Camilla understood that the issue had just moved beyond embarrassment into something much more serious. Charles hesitated when Anne finally spoke. She did not accuse Camilla. She did not raise her voice. She asked one question, slowly and clearly. Who authorized them to be here? No one answered. That silence became the most damaging part of the morning, because it suggested that either nobody wanted responsibility or somebody powerful had acted without expecting to be challenged. And before anyone could leave, Anne made one thing clear. The briefing would not resume until she received a direct answer today. Anne had stopped the meeting, but stopping the meeting was easy. Discovering who had opened the door to Camilla's family would force everyone in that room to reveal where their loyalties truly stood. The confrontation was never only about chairs around a table. For Anne, it was about boundaries. For Camilla, it was about family. For Charles, it was about protecting a marriage without weakening the crown. And for William, it was about deciding what kind of monarchy he might one day inherit. As the halted briefing dissolved into private conversations, 4 people began calculating what Anne's intervention could cost them, and what silence might cost even more. Anne had spent years becoming the person others expected to notice what everyone else preferred to ignore. The Princess Royal, a title traditionally held by the monarch's eldest daughter, had built her place around discipline, privacy, and a strict separation between personal affection and official responsibility. That mattered now, because the argument was not about whether Camilla loved and trusted her relatives. It was about whether private loyalty could quietly become access to sensitive royal business. Camilla caught Anne near the doorway, before the others had fully dispersed. She asked, quietly but directly, whether her family was truly being treated as some kind of danger. Anne did not insult them. She did not accuse them of wrongdoing. She simply answered that trust was not the same as authority. Camilla absorbed the words with visible hurt, because, to her, those relatives represented stability and personal support. To Anne, however, their presence inside that room created a precedent that could become impossible to control later. Charles carried the tension somewhere else entirely. He sat alone with the unfinished briefing folder in front of him, turning one page and then stopping. The king understood why his wife felt wounded, but he also knew Anne's objection could not be dismissed as stubbornness. Restricted royal meetings mattered because even a small change in access could influence future expectations, and because once private exceptions became normal, removing them later could create an even greater conflict. William chose a quieter path. He asked a senior aide for the original attendance list and waited while the earlier version was retrieved. The prince read it once, then again. Camilla's relatives were not there. Their names had been added later through a separate request, meaning the meeting had changed after the original plan was approved. Anne received the same information moments later. Her anger sharpened because the problem had shifted. She was no longer asking why those relatives had been present. She wanted to know who had changed the arrangement after the first list was settled. Then one detail stopped her cold. A name appeared beside the late alteration, but Anne knew immediately that the person listed may only have carried out someone else's instruction. The attendance list provided the first crack in the story, yet the real rupture had begun days earlier. During a private exchange, everyone had assumed would remain forgotten. 3 days before Anne stopped the briefing, another conversation had already pushed the palace toward collision. It happened after a smaller family gathering, when Camilla raised the idea that trusted relatives could occasionally sit in on discussions affecting her personal household. Anne objected immediately. Charles tried to calm both women. Nothing was formally decided. Yet before they separated, one sentence from Camilla transformed a disagreement over access into something far more personal, and Anne never forgot it. Camilla had spent months feeling the line between private family life and royal duty becoming harder to define. The Queen Consort's household, the staff and arrangements supporting her official and personal responsibilities, often touched matters involving schedules, finances, security, and family obligations. She believed that when those issues affected people closest to her, trusted relatives should not always be treated as outsiders. Anne understood the emotional logic, but she saw danger in allowing affection to become access. Anne had never objected to Camilla's family attending dinners, celebrations, or informal gatherings. The Princess Royal accepted that personal relationships mattered, and she had never demanded emotional distance for its own sake. But restricted briefings were different. When conversations involved security arrangements, internal finances, succession planning, or sensitive household decisions, she believed every person in the room needed a clear official reason to be there. That distinction mattered because once the boundary blurred, nobody could easily decide where it should be restored. Camilla finally said what she had been holding back. She told Anne that her relatives should not be treated like strangers when discussions directly affected her life. The words landed harder than she expected. Anne answered that love and trust could never create constitutional standing, meaning formal authority or an official right to participate in royal decisions. Charles immediately stepped between the two positions, warning that they were turning a practical disagreement into something deeply personal. Anne did not soften. She told Charles that rules only had value when they applied during uncomfortable moments, not merely easy ones. Camilla felt judged and insisted she was asking for understanding, not power. The king urged both women to stop before the disagreement became impossible to repair. Anne eventually left, but the issue stayed alive after the door closed. Camilla then made the request that would change everything. In a private conversation with Charles, she asked whether members of her family could attend one future briefing only as observers. He never clearly approved it. He also never clearly refused. His answer was cautious, something closer to, "We can consider it," and that ambiguity created enough space for someone else to act. Anne understood the significance only after seeing the altered attendance list 3 days later. The confrontation had not begun with a seating mistake. It had begun here, with an unresolved request and a vague answer. By the time Anne returned to face Camilla, she was no longer demanding an explanation for an awkward mistake. She believed a boundary had been tested deliberately. The second confrontation happened without ceremony. No reception line, no photographers, no prepared language. Anne entered a smaller adjoining room where Camilla was waiting, closed the door behind her, and placed the amended attendance sheet on the table between them. Neither woman raised her voice at first. That made the exchange more dangerous. Anne wanted one answer, Camilla wanted one concession, and neither appeared willing to leave until the other understood exactly what was at stake. Anne pushed the paper forward and made her position clear. Her concern was not whether she personally liked Camilla's relatives. It was precedent, an earlier decision that could be used to justify similar decisions later. Once private family members were allowed into restricted royal briefings, she argued, future exclusions would become harder to defend. Camilla answered that the meeting involved parts of her own household and private responsibilities, and being told she could not rely on people she trusted felt less like caution and more like isolation. Camilla watched Anne place one finger beside the added names. Then the question came directly. Had she requested those seats? The Queen Consort paused before answering, and that pause carried more weight than any denial could have. Yes, she admitted, she had wanted her relatives there. But she insisted that wanting them present was not the same as ordering palace staff to bypass procedure. She believed the request had already been accepted. Anne did not move away from the point. She told Camilla that years of service did not erase the rules that protected the institution. The Queen answered with something deeper. She had spent years entering rooms built around traditions that existed long before her, always conscious that she was expected to understand boundaries others had inherited naturally. Anne listened, but her response remained hard. Those same traditions restricted everyone, including the Princess Royal herself. Then Anne revealed the detail Camilla had not expected. Charles had never formally approved the altered attendance list. The king's earlier comment had been vague, but no direct authorization had been recorded. That meant someone had taken an informal conversation and turned it into what looked like an official instruction. Camilla's frustration changed instantly into concern, because the dispute was no longer simply about her request. It was now about how that request had moved through the palace without clear authority. Anne stood before the exchange could soften. She told Camilla the briefing would remain suspended until Charles personally determined how the change had been made and who believed they had permission to make it. Camilla did not stop her as she left. The dispute had now moved beyond Anne and Camilla, because only one person could settle whether royal protocol had been bent through misunderstanding or through the silent power of assumption. Charles had spent much of the crisis trying to prevent two parts of his life from colliding. Now avoidance was impossible. Anne wanted a ruling. Camilla wanted understanding. William wanted clarity. Sitting behind a closed door with the amended attendance list before him, the king confronted an uncomfortable reality. Whatever he decided would be interpreted not simply as a family choice, but as evidence of how firmly he could separate personal loyalty from royal authority. Charles read the amended list twice, then removed his glasses and set them beside the folder without speaking. The silence said enough. Because the original briefing had been convened under his household, the final responsibility rested with him. A royal household, in simple terms, is the staff and structure that support a senior royal's official and private duties. That mattered because the issue was no longer whether Camilla's relatives were trustworthy. It was whether informal family conversations could quietly change access to restricted royal business. Camilla approached him privately before he made the decision public inside the family. She did not ask him to defend the mistake. She asked him not to turn it into humiliation. The Queen Consort feared that her relatives would be treated as if they had forced their way into a room they had been invited to enter. Charles reassured her that no blame would be placed on them personally. but he also refused to dismiss the failure in procedure. Protecting her dignity could not mean pretending the rules had worked when they clearly had not. Then the missing piece finally surfaced. Charles learned through a documented internal account that one aide had interpreted his earlier words, "We can consider it," as enough approval to begin preparing extra seats. The king immediately understood the danger. He had never issued a direct instruction, yet his uncertainty had been treated as permission. Anne's concern had therefore been justified, even if no one had deliberately tried to deceive her. Charles made the ruling without drama. Camilla's relatives would not attend the rescheduled briefing. The altered names would be removed, and the original attendance plan would be restored. Anne had won the substance of the argument, but the monarch stopped short of accusing anyone of misconduct. He called it a failure of clarity, and he accepted that part of that failure belonged to him. Then Charles went further. From that point forward, every attendee at a restricted royal briefing would require written approval before entering. No assumption, no informal understanding, no blurred line between family closeness and official access. Charles had delivered the ruling Anne wanted, but the moment those new restrictions were issued, everyone understood that Camilla would now have to live with their emotional consequences. Camilla did not argue when Charles told her the decision. That silence unsettled him more than anger would have. Her relatives would not return to the briefing. Their names would be removed from restricted attendance lists. New written controls would apply to everyone. The Queen accepted each point, then asked only one question: whether Anne now believed she had been trying to seize influence for her family. Charles hesitated, and in that hesitation, Camilla heard the answer she feared most. Camilla understood that the rescheduled meeting would now return to its original restricted attendance. That meant only those formally approved for sensitive royal business would be present, with no personal guests added through informal requests. Palace staff were also instructed to treat her relatives with complete respect and make clear that they were not being accused of wrongdoing. That distinction mattered because the decision was meant to correct a broken process, not shame people who had entered the room believing they were welcome. Camilla stayed alone after Charles left. She removed a ring, placed it beside her untouched tea, and stared toward the closed door. The rule itself was not what hurt most. She had already accepted that her family would remain outside future restricted briefings. What wounded her was the thought that Anne might now see her as someone willing to use private relationships to gain influence. For Camilla, that possibility cut deeper than losing access ever could. Anne learned later through a private conversation with a senior aide that Camilla had taken the ruling personally. The Princess Royal felt no regret about stopping the meeting, but the emotional cost unsettled her. She had wanted to defend a boundary, not create a lasting accusation. Yet she also knew that backing away now would make the original intervention meaningless. William saw the danger growing. He told Anne privately that several aides feared the dispute could divide senior royals into quiet camps if it was allowed to harden. The prince warned that once family members began choosing sides, every future disagreement would carry the weight of this one. Anne listened because she knew he was not defending Camilla's request. He was protecting what remained after the decision. Then another detail reached Anne. Camilla had withdrawn from a planned informal family dinner. The Queen had not made a public statement or challenged Charles, but her absence sent its own message. The official argument had ended. The personal wound had not. William refused to let that distance deepen. He proposed one final step. Anne and Camilla should meet alone, with no advisors, no king, and no palace machinery standing between them. The rules had been settled, but the family had not, and repairing that fracture would require Anne and Camilla to face each other without titles protecting either of them. There were no folders on the table this time, no secretaries, no advisors waiting outside to interpret every sentence. Anne and Camilla met alone, not to renegotiate the briefing, but to decide whether the dispute would permanently change their relationship. For the first time since the confrontation began, Anne spoke about fear rather than protocol. Camilla answered with hurt rather than defense. And inside that stripped-down conversation, both women finally recognized that they had been protecting different things. William had encouraged the meeting because he believed the official argument was already finished. The prince knew the new attendance rule would remain, and he also knew another round of accusations could damage relationships long after the policy itself was forgotten. That mattered because senior royals still had to work beside one another after private disagreements ended. Anne entered knowing she would not reverse the decision. Camilla came knowing her relatives would remain outside restricted meetings. Anne spoke first. She told Camilla that she had never believed her family was automatically untrustworthy or dangerous. The Princess Royal feared something broader. Once personal closeness became informal access, it could create a precedent that later generations would struggle to control. She explained that her anger had been aimed at the broken boundary, not at the people sitting beyond it. Camilla finally answered without defending the original request. She admitted that being excluded had touched an older fear. The Queen Consort had spent years building a place inside royal life, yet moments like this reminded her that the people closest to her could still be treated as outsiders. She understood the rule, but emotionally, the message had felt different. Anne listened because she finally heard what procedure alone had hidden. Anne then acknowledged the part she could not ignore. Stopping the briefing in front of everyone had made Camilla feel personally accused. She accepted responsibility for that hurt, though she did not apologize for halting the meeting itself. The distinction mattered. One woman could admit the emotional damage without abandoning the principle that caused the confrontation. Camilla responded with her own concession. From that point forward, any request involving her relatives would move through formal channels, meaning clear approval would be required before private family members could enter sensitive official discussions. She would no longer rely on assumptions, informal comments, or personal understanding. The ambiguity that had started the crisis was gone. When Anne and Camilla finally left, they did so together, rather than separately. Staff immediately sensed that something had changed. The conflict had not been erased, but it had been contained by honesty. Inside the palace, the confrontation had reached understanding. Outside its walls, however, one image would turn a private dispute into a national conversation about family, access, and the meaning of royal duty. By morning, the argument was no longer contained by palace doors. Broadcasters focused on the interrupted briefing, commentators debated Anne's decision, and crowds gathered near Buckingham Palace, hoping to glimpse the royals involved. Yet one moment captured the entire story more powerfully than any headline. Anne's car approached the gates, while Camilla's followed only moments later. And instead of the expected signs of division, both women appeared at the same engagement within minutes of each other. Anne knew the public debate had already split into two clear sides. Some saw her intervention as essential protection of royal boundaries, while others believed Camilla had simply tried to keep trusted family close during discussions affecting her own household. Buckingham Palace, the monarch's main official residence and a central symbol of the crown, became the focus because every arrival now carried meaning. Palace messaging stressed that restricted briefings required formal approval, and that Camilla's relatives had not been accused of misconduct. Charles hated how quickly a private family disagreement had become a test of his leadership. The king worried that every explanation would create another headline, another interpretation, another reason for people to question whether he had lost control of the household. William urged restraint. The prince argued that the decision had already been made, the rules had been corrected, and over-explaining could make a resolved problem look like a continuing crisis. Charles listened because he knew silence could sometimes protect more than another statement. Camilla understood exactly what photographers were waiting for. One tense expression could be presented as humiliation. One moment of distance could become proof of a lasting feud. Anne felt the same pressure from the opposite direction. The Princess Royal knew that appearing too warm could make her intervention look meaningless, while appearing too cold could suggest the private reconciliation had failed. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Outside Buckingham Palace, one broadcaster described Anne and Camilla arriving for the same official engagement as a deliberate display of duty after an unmistakably personal rupture. The words spread quickly because they captured the strange balance of the day. Neither woman was pretending nothing had happened, yet neither was allowing the disagreement to destroy their public responsibilities. Camilla briefly exchanged words with Anne before they moved inside. Neither avoided the other. Neither offered a dramatic performance of reconciliation. That restraint became the clearest evidence that the relationship had survived. Charles saw it as relief. William saw it as proof that the private conversation had worked. The cameras captured reconciliation, but the true verdict would be written in what changed after the cameras were gone. The briefing eventually took place, but it was not the meeting originally planned. Camilla's relatives were absent. Every attendee had been formally approved. Anne took her seat without triumph, and Camilla entered without protest. Charles opened the discussion under rules that were now unmistakably clear. The confrontation had caused embarrassment, anger, and private hurt, yet its final meaning was more complicated than victory or defeat. Anne had defended a boundary. Camilla had forced the family to confront why that boundary mattered. Anne watched Camilla enter and gave her a small nod before the discussion began. The gesture was restrained, but it carried weight. The new written attendance policy, a rule requiring every person at a sensitive royal meeting to receive clear approval in advance, had now removed the ambiguity that caused the crisis. That mattered because private loyalty could no longer quietly become official access, and because future disagreements would be settled by clear procedure rather than assumption. Camilla accepted the new reality without challenging it. Her relatives would remain important parts of her private life, but that closeness would not automatically give them a place inside restricted royal decision-making. The Queen Consort had resisted that distinction emotionally at first, yet she now understood why Anne had defended it so fiercely. The rule had not been created to reject her family. It had been created to protect a line the monarchy could not afford to leave unclear. Charles felt relief, but regret remained underneath it. The king knew his own uncertain words had helped create the confusion, and he had learned something painful from the fallout. Family peace was not always protected by avoiding firm decisions. Sometimes harmony depended on making expectations clearer before resentment had time to grow. He had chosen authority over ambiguity, but he had also seen the human cost of waiting too long. William understood the deeper lesson. The prince saw that the monarchy he might one day inherit could not survive on personal trust alone. Affection and responsibility could exist together, but one could never quietly replace the other. Anne had not rebelled against Camilla, and Camilla had not been defeated. Instead, both women had forced the family to confront a problem that could have become far more damaging if nobody had challenged it. Anne finally closed the matter without celebration. The briefing was completed. The rules were settled. Camilla remained beside the family she had feared might reject her, and the Princess Royal maintained the boundary she believed duty required. No one had escaped without bruises, but no relationship had been destroyed. When the doors finally closed on the completed briefing, there was nothing left unresolved. Camilla's family remained family. Royal authority remained protected. Anne's warning had been heard, and the monarchy emerged bruised, but clearer about where loyalty ends and duty must begin. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.